probably thinking that the strangest things in history are some TikTok joke or scenes from a TV show. But imagine the 16th century, Europe. Aristocrats throw a grand feast. Everything's fine. Until one thing happens. They eat mummies. Yes, you heard that right. Mummies. This isn't fiction. It was a real tradition at the time. It sounds like something straight out of a movie, right? But it wasn't. It actually happened. And it wasn't the only bizarre thing from that time. Welcome to the strangest culinary and medical trend in history. Eating mummies. Let's set the stage. France, 1578. Picture a royal banquet. Wine is flowing. The table is covered with exquisite dishes, and amidst all these delicacies, there's a mummy. Not just a curiosity, but an actual ancient Egyptian mummy. This wasn't a one-off oddity. For centuries, mummies were highly prized among the elite. Why? Well, people back then believed that the powder of mummies could cure anything from headaches to epilepsy. And some believed consuming them would not only improve health, but even give them mystical powers. This was not a secret. It was an open, widely practiced tradition. And, as bizarre as it sounds, mummies were seen as essential for any high-class gathering. You might be wondering, how did this become a trend? Well, in the Renaissance, medicine wasn't as advanced as it is today. There were no antibiotics, no modern diagnostics, and no vaccines. So when something couldn't be explained, people resorted to mystical solutions. Mummy powder was considered a cure-all. It was sold as a treatment for just about every ailment. Mummies were even used in medical potions, ointments, and balms. If you were wealthy enough, you could afford an entire mummy to use as medicine. And if you were a noble, you might even eat part of one to show off your access to the rarest and most expensive treatments available. Imagine this. A grand table laid out with rich foods, servants in fine clothing, the flickering of candlelight as you sip wine, and in the midst of it all, a mummy. Not just for decoration. It was a real part of the meal. The nobles didn't see it as strange. They saw it as something that could heal them, protect them from disease, or even give them the vitality they needed to maintain their lavish lifestyle. Mummies were, in a way, the ultimate status symbol. After all, only the richest could afford such a rare and exotic ingredient. They weren't just eating, they were showcasing their wealth and power. But why mummies? Why not some other exotic item? The reason is that, at the time, anything related to Egypt was considered magical. Egyptians were seen as masters of mystical knowledge, and their mummies were thought to be not just bodies, but powerful ancient relics holding secrets of life and death. Using them in medicine, or even as a meal, was seen as a way of tapping into this power. But more than that, mummies became a symbol. They were the ultimate exotic commodity. Just as today people buy rare, expensive items to show their wealth, in the 16th century, the nobility showed their status through owning and consuming mummies. Now, let's talk about the effectiveness of these remedies. Was mummy powder really a cure-all? Of course not. We know now that it had no magical properties, and using it as medicine was utterly pointless. But back then, people didn't know better. The belief was that if something was rare and ancient, it must possess powers that could heal and protect. In many ways, it wasn't about the medicine itself. It was about the belief in the medicine. People wanted to believe that consuming these ancient remains would give them health, vitality, or even power. And what's even more interesting is that mummies weren't just eaten at banquets. They were used for medical purposes as well. In fact, mummy powder was one of the most popular medicines of the time. If you had enough money, you could buy an entire mummy and use it for its healing properties. There were even entire markets dedicated to selling mummies, and they were often recycled from tombs. sometimes even stolen from Egypt itself. This wasn't just a minor fad, it was a widespread practice that lasted for centuries. Now, you might be asking, why would anyone eat something so morbid? Why would they consume a corpse? The answer lies in the same mentality that drove many other bizarre practices of the time: belief in the supernatural. People didn't view mummies as dead bodies. They saw them as powerful relics. Consuming the remains of an ancient Egyptian nobleman or priest wasn't seen as morbid. It was seen as a way to absorb their strength and wisdom. It was a form of respect, a form of connection to a more mystical and powerful past. But this wasn't just about health or magic. Mummies, in a way, were a commodity that reflected the social status of the person who owned them. To have a mummy at your table, to display it in your home, was to say that you had access to something rare, something that few others could even dream of. It was a social statement, much like owning a priceless artifact or a piece of art today. The difference is, back then, the artifact you sought was an actual human corpse. What's also fascinating is how this tradition continued for so long, even after people began to realize that mummies weren't exactly a cure for anything. The belief in their power lingered, and it didn't just happen in France. In other parts of Europe, including Italy, Spain, and England, the practice of using mummies in medicine continued well into the 17th century. The idea of consuming mummies became so entrenched that it even led to the mummy trade, the illegal exportation of Egyptian mummies for medical and ceremonial use. Some even claimed that consuming the remains of a mummy could cure ailments as serious as tuberculosis or cancer. But why did the practice persist for so long, even when we can clearly see how strange and irrational it was? Well, part of it has to do with how society functioned at the time. In the absence of modern science, people turned to what they understood: magic, rituals, and the supernatural. Mummies, like many other cures, offered an explanation for what couldn't be understood. If you were sick, it wasn't because you had an infection or a virus. It was because something spiritual had gone wrong, and using a mummy, an ancient relic, was seen as a way to restore balance. And let's be honest, it's easy to laugh at these medieval habits. Eating mummies? That's absurd, we might say. But when you really think about it, we're not that far removed from these strange practices. Sure, we don't eat mummies, but we still believe in all sorts of miracle cures, from wellness supplements to magic crystals. We still look for answers to our problems in things that, scientifically, don't make sense. Today, instead of mummies, we're obsessed with things like superfoods or energy healing, both of which offer promises of better health and mystical power. So, maybe we haven't come as far as we think. We still have this deep need to find magical explanations for the unknown. In the end, this story about mummies at feasts isn't just a funny historical anecdote. It's a reflection of human nature. Even today, we need explanations, even if they're nonsensical, to help us make sense of a chaotic world. So, the next time you see a meme about eating mummies at a royal banquet, remember that it's not just a joke. It's a reminder that, throughout history, people have always tried to make sense of their world in strange and often absurd ways. And maybe, just maybe, we're still doing the same thing.